It was a humid morning in Cienaga when the sound of factory whistles and the quiet murmur of 1,000 men turned to a single demand: recognition. In the banana towns along Colombia's Magdalena River, December 1928 had become a test of wills. Men who loaded rail cars, cut fruit, and tended the plantations for the United Fruit Company walked off the job. They asked for an 8-hour day, overtime pay, decent medical care, and an end to the company's script system that paid in tokens rather than cash. What began as a labor strike quickly collided with politics and empire. To understand what followed, you must see the map of power at the time. United Fruit was more than a business. It ran railways, owned ports, controlled towns. Its enclaves were semi-autonomous worlds: company stores, company police, company doctors. In Bogota, President Miguel Abadía Mendez presided over a fragile government fearful of economic collapse. In Washington, American diplomats and businessmen watched their investments with the old anxiety of the 1920s. Any disruption of trade meant headlines and losses. Against that backdrop, the strike was painted by company officials and some diplomats as a threat to order, indeed as the first tremors of Bolshevism in the hemisphere. On December 5th and 6th, gunfire answered the picket lines. The Colombian army, dispatched to restore order, faced thousands of unarmed workers who had blocked rails and refused to load fruit destined for export. Eyewitnesses described soldiers firing into crowds, and survivors remembered wounded men dragged into the shadows. The government's official statement after the episode listed 47 dead. United Fruit's corporate dispatches emphasized sabotage and chaos. Newspapers sympathetic to the company framed the strike as irrational and violent. But survivors, priests, and local doctors told a different story. Dozens more than the official count, bodies buried in haste outside town limits, entire families silenced. Here, a conspiracy of convenience took shape. Company agents had mapped the strike's leaders, identified key depots, and pressured local officials to act. Bogota feared both economic loss and international scandal. The military sought quick results. United Fruit benefited from a narrative that justified force: portray the labor organizers as insurrectionists, validate the use of troops, and stabilize exports. The result was a coordinated suppression that blurred lines between corporate interest and state violence. Tellingly, investigations were limited, records were incomplete, and many witnesses were too frightened to testify. The official account remained short, crisp, and contained, while whispers of mass graves, displaced families, and covered-up corpses spread among the workers. This was not an isolated incident in Latin America. United Fruit's reach and the United States' history of protecting investments in the region, often by force, created a pattern. But in Cienaga, the brutality met a different afterlife. Memory became literature. Decades later, Gabriel Garcia Marquez would turn the massacre into one of the most haunting scenes in 100 Years of Solitude, and that fictional echo helped fix the event in global consciousness. Historians since have worked to reconcile the official figures with oral testimony and archival fragments. Estimates of the dead now range well beyond the 47 the government reported, though an exact tally remains impossible. The broader conspiracy was not only the shots fired on those 2 days, it was the erasure that followed. Records were sealed or lost. Company memos stressed security, not reconciliation. Political leaders emphasized stability. For the workers, the lesson was blunt. Organized labor could be criminalized, and the state might answer corporate alarm with the barrel of a gun. The Cienaga massacre changed Colombian labor politics and left a scar on national memory. It exposed how a multinational's economic priorities could bend local power, and how narratives, who is labeled a terrorist, who is called a worker, would determine whether a life counted in historical ledger books. The conspiracy was not a single secret handshake in a dark room. It was a sequence of public decisions that together produced a cover-up big enough to hide dozens, perhaps hundreds of lives. In the humid mornings that returned to Cienaga after 1928, the plantations kept producing, ships kept sailing, and the town learned to move in the shadows of what had been erased. The story of the bananas and bullets lingered, passed in whispers, in a novelist's pages, in fragmented archives, until historians and survivors demanded that the silence be broken. The truth, when it emerges, is seldom simple, but in that humid morning in Cienaga, the collision of labor, empire, and government laid bare a conspiracy that reshaped a nation's conscience.